Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Ooh, we gotta hit this. There, okay. Good afternoon, I'm Tiffany Edwards. I'm the president of the Springfield City Club, and I want to welcome everybody today. That looks important.
Just a clicker. We don't need
I'm
that.
a mess. So I'm excited to bring to you a presentation today by Rob Zako, to my left, with Better Eugene-Springfield Transportation and on better streets for people and business. And without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and then I'll come back up at the end. Hold your questions, and we'll go ahead and do Q&A after the presentation. And happy to moderate if needed, or you can just call on people, whatever you're comfortable with.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you, everyone. It's my honor to be here, talking to you about some work that Best is doing with other partners, Better Streets for People and Businesses. I'm going to talk today about Better Streets and a bit about Main Street, which is probably what you're most interested in. But just spoiler alert, this is really less about transportation. It's more about building community. I would say that what Best does is maybe 20% of it's sort of planning, design, engineering, technical stuff. 80% of it's soft stuff about how we work together. So let me find my clicker here. Okay. So let's get into it. First, an icebreaker question. This happens to be the National Week Without Driving. This is a national event that was started by our partner up in Washington State, the Washington Disability Rights for Washington, and it's this entire week. And it's intended to highlight how people who don't have regular access to car get around. And those include youth, seniors, disabled, young adults, people with low incomes, people with legal issues. Just anyone. What would you say is the fraction of Americans who don't have regular access to a car daily?
55%.
55% don't drive? That's pretty high.
20%.
That's a low.
42.
That's pretty close. The figure I've heard is a third, actually, and that's really such a large number. I found that hard to believe. But I checked in Oregon. Oregon has about 4 million people. And it has about 3 million people who have driver's license. So about a quarter of Oregonians can't drive at all because they don't have a driver's license. There are other people who have a driver's license, but for various reasons can also not drive. So the figure of a third is probably about right. So let me do this clicking thing here. Clicking thing here.
There, you got it.
Okay. If you want to participate, that is a live QR code, or you can go to best-oregon.org/NWWD and learn more, participate. Okay, let's get started here. And what I'm going to do today is just tell some stories. I'm going to talk about some examples, some things that Best has been involved in, mostly about Eugene, which is where I live, and we've done most of our work, a little bit about Springfield. I'm hoping that we talk more about Springfield and Main Street in the questions and answers. And I'm hoping that you will tell me and teach me some things that I don't know. Okay, so let's start here. And let's talk about public sentiment. Let's talk about what the people want. So this is kind of a greatest hits of controversy over transportation for the last 10 years. Again, mostly in Eugene. And we'll start with West UGMX. This is where I got my start. Best got her start. It was a decade ago. There was actually a couple groups that had an amazing lawn sign campaign. I think they spent like $100,000. And at the time, if you went out West Eugene, or actually lots of places in Lane County, there are all sorts of signs. Let me just say up front that I'm not viewing this as us versus them or right versus wrong. The reality was at the time that Best actually shared a lot of the concerns of the people opposed to MX. The difference was how we want to respond to that. And I love their slogans. I see some of my LTD friends here. I have to say that their campaign was effective because the label of arrogant bureaucrats resonated with people. It wasn't totally true, but it was also not totally false. Other signs here, yeah. We want people to get around. We want more buses everywhere. We want to have responsible transit. Who disagrees with that? That makes sense. It wasn't whether we do MX or not or make improvements. It's sort of a question of where and how and who pays for it. Okay. So another controversy a little bit more recently, I couldn't find one of the signs from that campaign, but the city of Eugene was proposing for years to restrike South Willamette Street. In all these cases, the details are different, but businesses are concerned that they're going to get a business, they'll lose customers, they'll lose access, things like that. So Willamette Street at the time was a 4-lane undivided street with no center turn lane. The proposal was to turn into 2 travel lanes, a center turn lane, and a couple bike lanes. And there was a campaign around there. I think it was 4 lanes for all was the title of the campaign, thinking that the world would end. No, the world did not end. Thinking that businesses would lose customers because they couldn't get there. So another example, more recent, this is last year. People concerned about LTDs and the city of Eugene's plans to possibly build MX bus rapid transit along River Road. People concerned for several reasons of not wanting to do that. Come on. That led some folks to organize and mount a recall campaign against the sitting city councilor. There was a lot of talk about MX, about taking lanes. There are other issues there. That ended up being a successful recall. And so city councilor, who had been elected by people, lost her position. It says right there, only 1 lane for cars on River Road. Currently, there are 2 lanes in each direction, as on Main Street. Okay. An interesting personal note about this. Early on, the recall website talked about something called the Trans-Industrial Complex. I had never heard of this concept before. I think it's sort of like the military industrial complex. But BEST was actually named in connection with the recall against Claire Surratt. I think the implication was that we're a very rich nonprofit organization. We're getting federal funding or LTD funding and building I don't know what and getting rich. That's not the case. We're a privately funded nonprofit, and I make a lot less than I probably deserve, but that's okay. Another recent controversy is Franklin Boulevard. On the left, you can see here, the city of Eugene has proposals to transform Franklin Boulevard, put in roundabouts, put in bike lanes, various things. A local business, pharmacy, Hirons, is concerned that they'll lose customers, they'll lose parking, they'll lose access, they'll have to close. They're actually concerned that Market of Choice right next to them will also have to close. And finally, in my greatest hits of concerns, there are businesses here in Springfield that formed together, a group called Common Sense for Springfield, and the campaign is Protect Main Street. And there were concerns raised about the city of Springfield's plans to put in roundabouts and raise medians and other things like that. I want to emphasize that, again, we don't see this as us versus them. We don't see, what all these things have in common is a fear of change. And fear of change is perfectly natural. We're all human beings. We know what we know. Something different is maybe not so good. Change is hard. We see across the country with project after project, people afraid of change, people fear of losing what they have, fear of what might be. I will say, though, of the 2 projects that went forward that I know of, that is West Eugene MX and South Willamette Street, those fears proved to be unfounded. As far as I know, no businesses went out of business. It's worked fairly well. I know a little bit more about South Willamette Street, which is close to where I live, and traffic there seems to work fine. That's not necessarily to say that the projects were the best projects at all. It's just that those fears were probably overblown. So fear of change is natural. We're all human beings. We all have fear of change. And yet, if nothing changes, we're kind of stuck. I mean, some changes, we want to make our community better. We want to build a better community. How do we do that? So I'm going to talk to you first a little bit about the theory of change, and I'll talk to you about the practice of it. Then I'll talk about what BEST is doing that's related to Springfield and Main Street. So Abraham Lincoln, before he was president, in one of his debates with Douglas, I don't know my American history, said, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, everything can succeed. We live in a democracy. We live in a representative democracy. We don't live in a dictatorship. No government can really push forward something that doesn't have public support. And that's what we see over and over again with these major transportation projects. Fast forwarding a couple of centuries, a century and a half forward from Abraham Lincoln's time to the current time, there's a nonprofit organization in New York City called Transit Center. Actually, David Bragg, who used to be president of Portland Metro Regional Government up in Portland, has been their executive director. And a few years ago, they did a research project, and they looked around the country at what cities were really being innovative, what cities were changing transportation for the better. And what they found, a little bit to their surprise, is that it wasn't technical factors. It was human factors that were the key to that. And it's what they called the cycle of change. Specifically, what they found is that successful cities have three elements that work well together. Going from bottom to top, actually, you need really good staff. You need agency champions who can make changes, are willing to do that. They can't do that without their city leadership empowering them to make changes. But the key finding really is that elected officials actually can't make big changes without support of the public. And that's what best is found with West Virginia MX and other cases like that. You need a resident-led, non-elite, and outside government, yet able to persuade politicians, group of people to partner with, push, nudge, educate governments to do what's in the best interest of the community. That's the theory. So in practice, I'm going to tell you a couple stories where that's worked well for best. I could tell you lots of stories. If you're interested, ask me the questions and answers, but I'll give just a couple examples. So let me just say, BEST, to introduce myself, BEST is a 501c3 educational nonprofit. We're building a successful community by bringing people together to promote transportation options, safe streets, and walkable neighborhoods. And the building community and bringing people together is really key to our identity. It's really key to how we form and how we do things. Our coming out party was in September of 2012. We had formed BEST earlier that year in response to the West Virginia MX. You can see here, rest in peace, Dave Hauser, former executive director of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. Julie Daniel was executive director of Bring Recycling here in town at the time. And at the time, Eugene Mayor Kitty Piercy. But at our coming out party, BEST handcrafted an organization that had leaders from business, social service, environmental groups, neighborhoods, K through 12, Eugene 4J, higher ed, University of Oregon, Lane Community College, Peace Health, people of faith, neighborhood leaders. I see some people in this room who were involved in the early days around that. We brought together a group where we didn't agree on a lot of things, but we agreed that investments in our community and in better transit made sense. And shortly after that, we testified Eugene City Council. I think it was 40 people testifying in favor and 3 against. When we started the campaign back in 2012, it looked like only 3 out of 8 Eugene City Council supported West Virginia MX. That wasn't because they were opposed to the project. It was because of all the lawn signs, all that arrogant bureaucrats and losing tax dollars and more librarians and less planners and no MX without a public vote. They were listening to people, which is what we want to have in a democracy. After we testified, and we had this broad group of people testify, the Eugene City Council basically voted unanimously in favor of the project. A few years later, it was built. On the table is $95 million in money that our community otherwise would not have. $75 million in federal funding and $20 million in state funding. This is then Congressman Peter DeFazio on the trial run of MX riding it. He posted that on his Twitter feed back then. I'll give one more example of how we build community, and I'll talk about better streets. This one hits much closer to home here in Springfield. I think everyone probably knows what I'm picturing here. This is a memorial at 54th and Main Street. BEST at the time, so this is February of 2015. BEST at the time was a transit-focused organization. We just had a retreat, and we finished our retreat, and the news was that at 54th and Main, a driver had lost attention. It happens to all of us from time to time. Ran a red light, hit a mother and her 3 kids. The mother survived. These 3 kids, age 8, 5, and 4, I believe, did not. At the time, again, Best was focused on transit. And this shook the community. It shook people in Springfield, it shook people in Eugene. It's not that these tragedies don't happen, they sadly happen all the time, but to have 3 in one incident, an entire family, all the kids, it was just heart-wrenching. And Best, one of the things we do is we identify issues that deserve public attention. We educate ourselves and people around us. We reach out, we advocate the public interest. And so we looked around to ask who was working on transportation safety issues in our community. And we knew of one group, which was Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, but there was no alcohol. There was no, the man who was driving was perfectly competent. That wasn't the issue here, and yet this tragedy happened. So we decided to educate ourselves. We heard about something called Vision Zero. It comes from Sweden. The idea is that every life is precious. We don't want to see anybody die. We don't want to see anybody so severely injured that it changes their life. And we, because Best is more of a Eugene group, or was at the time, we went to the Eugene City Council and we got a bunch of people sign a petition. We had people testify. We said, City of Eugene, we think life's important. Can you adopt this goal of, ideally having no people die on traffic crashes in Eugene? Oh, sorry. ARP did an embarrassing, flattering story about me and Vision Zero. That's me pictured at 54th and Main. Let me skip past that. Over a period of years, we were quite successful. The City of Eugene now has a Vision Zero policy. The Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization has a Transportation Safety Action Plan, and they're moving towards zero. Lane County has a towards zero deaths policy of also trying to reduce deaths on our roadways. And so, okay, let me get back to where I am here. Okay, so much for what the public thinks, for some theory of change, for how this has worked for us in the past. And let me emphasize that I'm up here talking to you. It's not just me. My program manager, Claire Roth, is here with us today. We have 4 interns from the University of Oregon, but most importantly, we have all kinds of partners. Everything that Best does is partnering with other organizations, with businesses, with neighborhood leaders. I've been in this business for 25 years, and for the first half of it, I worked alone or with a single organization and was incredibly ineffective. I don't know why I kept doing it. Since joining Best, we've had a lot of successes, and it's because we're working together. That's the magic sauce. So I want to talk to you lastly about a campaign that we're doing now with partners, Better Streets for People and Businesses. Okay, so this is in response to several examples I gave before. It's a response to Franklin Boulevard, River Road, Main Street in Springfield. The details of each of those are different, but the dynamic is typically the same. And we wanted to figure out how do we build community? How do we break down barriers? How do we go from this kind of, us versus them, we're fighting, to finding some common ground and finding a way forward? First thing we did is we stopped talking about the future. We stopped talking about solutions. We stopped talking about roundabouts, medians, taking away parking, all that. That's kind of hard, and that can be technical. And people, if you start talking about solutions, get into their bunkers and disagree with each other. What we want to do is talk about problems, about what's happening right here and now, where we are, what everybody knows about. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple cases that we're doing this. Well, let me talk now. Let me see what my slides are here. We did a bunch of outreach on Franklin Boulevard starting in May and over the summer. We had a little bit of help from the American Public Transportation Association to do this. We got 600 responses. And the quotes prior to that were, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Some of the businesses were saying, there's no problem with Franklin Boulevard. And I'll talk about one of those businesses in a moment of how that might have changed. If in fact there is no problem, we've got other things to do. That's correct. Don't fix something if it's not broken. But if there is a problem, that behooves us to figure out how do we come together to solve it. And so when there is a problem, if we identify a problem, we want to work with others to figure out what are the alternatives, what makes sense, what can we recommend collectively, as we did with West GMX. And finally, if a bunch of people in the civic sector, that first circle in the cycle of change, come together and feel like we think this makes sense, we can share that with elected leaders and maybe they will agree to. Okay, that's our approach. This is live right now. Carmel Snyder with ARP Oregon and Ray were with me, and that's all I see. We tabled at the block party, Springfield's block party a few weeks ago. Got a lot of people. We had this poll. We're asking a very simple question. How safe, practical, attractive is Main Street for everyone today? Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. We want to know. We want to know in detail, does it work for you if you're driving, if you're walking, if you're riding the bus, if you're on an e-scooter, if you're biking, whatever. Take our 2-minute poll to be entered to win a gift card to Fred Meyer or other retailer. You can use the link there, best-oregon.org/Main Street, or scan the QR code. It takes you to a live poll right now. Feel free to do that. Around your table, you should also have handouts that have that information. Share with people. I'll leave some extras if anybody wants to take those. It's really important to at least strive to hear from everyone, all points of view. Everybody matters. That's really hard to do, as our partners in government know. We live in a society which is increasingly siloed. There's no single TV station that we all listen to. There's not a daily paper for many of us. We're on all sorts of different social media. We're in different social groups. People trust different people. It's really hard to reach out to everyone, but it's really important to do so. And we're trying to do it. We're trying to do that with the help of our interns. And so some really simple techniques of how we're trying to get the word out and hear from people. First of all, it's amazing. If you ask somebody for 2 minutes of their time, they're going to say, no, I'm too busy. I don't want to do that. If you say, can I have 2 minutes of your time? You might win a gift card. People are actually interested. That worked really well on campus and off campus. It was a really good technique. As you can see, we have these handbills that we hand out. Walk up to somebody. Hey, can I have 2 minutes of your time? You might win a gift card to Fred Meyer. Just want to hear your views. Thank you very much. You can do this on your smartphone or home. Social media, email, news stories, walking tours one-on-one, working with partner organizations. We're not connected to everybody in the community. We're not trusted by everybody in the community. We want to work with people. In the Springfield Block Party, we heard we don't have the poll yet in the Spanish language. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but that's absolutely true. There's a significant Spanish-speaking population here in Springfield. We want to work with some of our partners who work with those people to get the word out to them. And lastly, suspending judgment. As I'll talk about in a moment, when we're doing our walking tour on Franklin, people say, well, what is the best thing? What should we do on Franklin? And I quite honestly said, we don't know yet. We haven't addressed that question. Right now, we want to hear from you. You're the experts. You work here, you go to school here, you have a business here. You tell us what Franklin is. And if there's a problem, let's talk about that and solve it together. Okay. How am I doing for time? I'm almost done. Okay. So last slide before we go to Q&A. We did 2 walking tours on Franklin Boulevard. And so the leading critic of the City of Eugene's plans to make changes on Franklin is one of the owners of Hiron's. It's a local pharmacy. It's a great store. They do amazing stuff. I don't know how they get all that stuff in there and sort of market all, but they're brilliant. And we had a walking tour on Franklin, and John showed up, and he had a totem. He had this sign about all the things bad with roundabouts. And I said, John, we're really glad you're here. We want to hear from everybody. We're not going to be talking about roundabouts today. You know why? There are no roundabouts today on Franklin Boulevard. I don't see them. They're not there. We're just going to talk about what's here today. We want to talk about roundabouts next, but for today, let's just talk about what's here. Let's go for a walk. Let's see what we see. Let's share with each other. We'll come back and we'll talk about it. So we did that. We walked up and down Franklin Boulevard. We gathered then. It was a smaller group. And we asked everybody, based upon what you just saw, how would you rate Franklin Boulevard on a scale from 1 to 5? Is it the best street ever? Is it the worst street? Is it somewhere in between? And so John said, oh, it's almost the best or close to the best. I give it pretty close to the top there. Okay. So this is actually a picture from our second walking tour. Eugene Mayor Lucy Vinnis, the head of Lane County Public Works, some safe routes to schools people. We had a good turnout. John was there again. Again, he brought his totem. Again, he was saying, what was bad with roundabouts? He said, okay, John, you remember we did the spiel last time. Can you just, set that aside? We'll talk about roundabouts later. Let's go for a walk and then we'll talk about it. So this is us after the walk, talking and sharing what we saw. An interesting thing happened. John said, we're walking around, we're a group of like 20 people or so, and to cross Franklin Boulevard walking, you have to press the button. You get a flashing light that says you've got 30 seconds to cross, but it's a pretty wide street. So a bunch of us are walking and none of us are marathon runners. Most of us are able-bodied. We were finding we could just barely get across Franklin in the time allotted. If any of us had any sort of disability, we wouldn't be able to get across. And John noticed that. He said, the crossing signals for pedestrians are too short. He said, vehicles are driving too fast. The posted speed limit on Franklin right now is 35 miles an hour. There are people clearly driving 40, 45, even 55 miles an hour. It was noisy. And the last thing he said was, it's like this today. What's it going to be like in 10 years? We've got to do something. I said, John, you're absolutely right. What I'm hearing you say is today, Franklin Boulevard is not perfect. It could be better. How it can be better, that's a separate conversation, but that's an opportunity for us to find common ground. You and I agree that there are problems on Franklin Boulevard. Let's identify those a little bit more and let's talk about it and let's involve you in that. Okay, common joy. I think that's all I have to say, actually. Let me turn it over to you. Questions, and I would be happy to talk more about Main Street. If you're expecting me to tell you the answer, I don't have, if you want to talk about Main Street, you're happy to do that. There's some questions there. And I would love to hear from you whether you see opportunities in Springfield to engage the community, whether you have ideas about how to reach out to people, how, who best should partner with, who could help us with that effort. So, yes.
I'll start with a question. Rob, you kind of touched on this and you mentioned something that was mentioned in your walking tours that it works today, but what's going to be like 10 years from now, and knowing enough about transportation projects and how they work to know that they take a really long time to plan, to get the funding and everything else like that. And so I'm kind of wondering how you all see that and approach that when you are looking at engaging a community that's saying there's nothing wrong today, it's fine, and just kind of understanding, like, is that part of your education process to sort of walk them through the way that works?
You're absolutely right, and having worked for LTD and for the chamber, a typical MX project has taken 7 to 10, maybe even longer than that. I think it's like taken 7 years just to get the approvals, like another 5 years to build. It's like 12 years from beginning to end. And so when we're talking about these major transportation projects, we are always talking about sort of the future and planning for building a better community. But I would say there are clearly problems today. I didn't mention Coburg Road. Lane Transit District has had 2, maybe 3 attempts to see if there's interest in doing MX and Coburg Road, and businesses have resoundingly said no all those times. But you'd have to be blind to think that Coburg Road today is working just great. Whenever I drive out there, I do drive, it's many times a day, stop and go traffic, and it's only going to get worse. So I don't think we need to convince people that we're talking just about the future. I think really talking about today, we don't have enough resources to solve problems that don't yet exist. I think that we have to focus on things that we have right now in front of us. Len.
Rob, to follow up on Tiffany's point, not only do these projects take a lot of time to get in place, but they require an unbelievably large amount of money. I'm not asking for a solution, but how do we approach the reality that, you cannot come up with funds to do any sort of transportation project on your own? What's the answer?
I don't know if I have the answer. Let me share another story and see if I'm getting at what you're asking at. I have been in this business now for 25 years, and fairly early on did learn that we can't do much on our own. And I've been involved in many collaborative efforts. One that I've found most gratifying is I was the consultant that put together the Lane Area Commission on Transportation. The Lane Area Commission on Transportation has no authority, it has no money, it's advisory to the Oregon Transportation Commission. But the Oregon Transportation Commission definitely does have money. They get to spend, I don't know, a couple $1 billion a year of various sorts. And the Lane Act advises them on what priorities are across Lane County. Lane Act is made up of 30 or so people from all the cities, the county, transit agency, tribes, ports, and others. As a consultant, I was a private consultant at the time. When I approached people about forming the Lane Act, what I told them was, you know what? There's not a lot of money. If all of you people don't agree what's important, the OTC is going to give the money to somebody else who knows what they want. The only way that you have any influence is if you can agree with each other. And that was the guiding principle to form the Lane Act. So Lane Act is formed on a consensus basis. And it's not because we all agree with each other or have kumbaya or sort of some warm and funny feelings about each other. It's very pragmatic of saying, you know, if we agree, maybe there's a chance we get some funding. If we disagree with each other, the money's going to go elsewhere. So that's just sort of, that's the reality of politics. That doesn't make money appear, but I think that that's a necessary ingredient. You know, when funding for transportation is competitive, it's those people who have strong community support from a lot of partners who will get funded. I don't know if that gets to what you're asking now.
That's part of it.
Okay.
Rob?
Yes.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for serving our community and advocating for the public's best interests. You mentioned the live poll that's going on. Can you speak to some of the trends that you're seeing and the answers? Are people saying that the Main Street is more safe than uses?
So we only just started the Main Street poll a few weeks ago at Springfield's Block Party. We were tabling there. We got something like 25 or 30 responses. We just hired some student interns to help with this work. This is the second week of classes. We haven't done the same level of outreach yet that we had already done with Franklin Boulevard.
Any feedback that's stands out?
I haven't looked closely, but I anticipate that for people who drive on Main Street, it probably works pretty well. For those 1 out of 3 people who don't drive, people who walk, people are young, people are old, people are poor, people are disabled, people, I see Carmel nodding, age-friendly communities. It's a dangerous street. We know we know it's a dangerous street. The city of Springfield knows it's a dangerous street. The city of Springfield's page on the Main Street Safety Project says Main Street is one of the least safe state highways in the state of Oregon. I don't know if that's true.
Accidents and everything.
I don't know what exactly is behind that, but that's what's being said. Celine.
Yeah, sort of off of that, I think when you talked about public sentiment at the beginning of your presentation, a lot of what you talked about was pretty successful PR efforts that perhaps represented, not in every case, but sort of the loudest voices rather than necessarily the majority of voices. And I really am interested in what you're trying to do a survey to maybe get a little bit broader input. But how are you designing your outreach efforts to make sure that you are reaching those folks who are in those categories that you just listed?
That's a good question, Celine. And I will say we are still learning how to do that. We're learning how to do that with very limited resources. We had a $10,000 grant from the American Public Transportation Association to do our outreach on Franklin Boulevard. Governments have a lot more funding. We're working with partners. We're trying to identify categories of people and who's connected to that. So I mentioned before here in Springfield, Spanish-speaking people. So we're going to approach our partners, which is Berta de Familia, Downtown Languages, Central Latino Americano, and work with them and say, where do people that are your clients gather? Who do they trust? What is the best way to reach out to them? Working with NAACP, working with social service agencies. Catholic Community Services has been a partner of ours here in Springfield. Really using a variety of messengers and channels for communication. Maybe the other half of your question, we're not trying to have an election. The opponents of MX in West Eugene thought that there should be a public vote. Public votes are very expensive. It involves a lot of people with varying degrees of information to make decisions. That's perhaps arguably not the way that in a representative democracy big decisions be made. We have elected officials because they have more time and staff support to make hard decisions. But I go back to the cycle of change and that elected officials can't make decisions in a vacuum. What I would say worked for best is that if a bunch of community leaders who are outside government independently or talking to each other come to see their particular way forward makes sense, then they can bring their constituents along, not because I'm right, but Dave Hauser, brought the Eugene Chamber along, and Matt Roberts with the University of Oregon and Jenny Ullum with Peace Health and various people at that time sort of brought their people along. And we came to a place where community leaders trying to do the best thing in the community's interest said, given what we've heard from our constituents and what we've looked at on the ground and looking at what the plans are, this seems to be better than doing nothing. Not perfect, but better. I don't know if that gets at what you're asking. Other questions? Michelle.
Once you've compiled data, twofold question, what's your anticipated timeline for working with all of these partners that you're identifying and gathering this data? At what point do you anticipate bringing that to elected officials and city leaders?
So different answers, different timelines for different corridors. Franklin Boulevard is further along. We've pretty much wrapped out our first phase of public outreach. We have over 600 responses. We have a draft of a preliminary summary report that we're hoping to release next week and share with the public, have a media release with LTD, with the city of Eugene, with the University of Oregon, which is just going to be a snapshot of this is what people are saying. I mean, the top line there is 3/4 of the respondents of the 600 said that they saw Franklin Boulevard as fair, poor, or worse on a scale from 1 to 5. Much more interesting than that, though, of sort of that subjective, is how do they break it down for different modes? And a lot of comments. We were overwhelmed by the number of detailed comments. People are donating their time, and we're still going through that to try to identify themes and report that back. But we will share a summary of that with everyone. We intend to share with Lane Transit District, the City of Eugene, University of Oregon, the detailed responses anonymized with people's names taken out of it because we pledged to do that. The next step with Franklin is, well, the City of Eugene already has, they have a plan or they have a concept, and they released a report and their recommendations in late August. Best has not had time to digest that yet. We're wanting to pull together a small team and take a look at that. We frankly have questions about roundabouts, pedestrian crossings, about double tracking MX. We generally see a need to have something done. Whether what the City of Eugene is proposing or not is exactly right, we don't know. But we've done this in the past before, that we'll put together a team, we'll have a few meetings, we'll reach out, and we're hoping that by the end of this year, we will have recommendations on Franklin. For Main Street, well, Main Street, you're going to have to help us with this. Main Street is sort of the third in line. We want to make sure the community wants us to do this and kind of what support there is for that. We've started working on River Road. We're hoping to do outreach on River Road this fall and hear from people. That's going to be a harder project, though, because right now, as you know, moving ahead is on pause. LTD had proposed doing MX there. Right now, you're not talking about that. Without MX, it's unclear where funding would come for the City of Eugene to do things. The City of Eugene's working on other stuff. Best doesn't have the resources to do $1 million grant and do all the planning work for you. That's not our job. But I think that we can make some recommendations of saying, we see these opportunities, maybe this direction is something to consider. I would hope we could do that first quarter of next year. For Main Street, it's 1 quarter beyond. I'm hoping that Main Street over the next quarter or two, we do some outreach, depending upon what we hear, maybe make some recommendations to whoever's interested by June or so of next year is what I'm thinking of. led.
Yeah, has Vest taken a look or planning to take a look at the Franklin Boulevard project in Springfield, the phase 2 project from where it currently ends to the, where it meets I-5 and Eugene?
We have not. We would be interested in doing that if there's interest in the community in doing that. For us, it's a matter, I mean, you see all of our staff here in this room, Claire and me, we've got 4 interns. I won't tell you how small our budget is. Right now, we're trying to do 3 major projects so let me think about this. The tragedy on Main Street happened in 2015. That was 8 years ago. River Road planning for moving ahead started in 2014, about 9 years ago. Franklin Boulevard has been Franklin Boulevard's farther along. We're trying to do some really ambitious stuff. We're not claiming to have all the answers, but we need to kind of gauge what we have the capacity to do and what the need is. You know, if Franklin Boulevard ends up being a really controversial project, you know, and it'd be helpful to have a second look at that, we would consider doing that. I don't know that that's the case. The first phase of that's already been built. There's funding needed for the second phase. So, I mean, I think if that's on track, we'd probably just sort of sit on the sidelines and say, that looks like a good project to us.
Thanks.
Lee.
Couple of observations. One is I think this has been interesting listening to you. I think where you started out in the process is correct. I think the failing that governments traditionally make, and I've been involved in a lot of that, is they start out with a proposal. And that automatically lines people up on both sides. So I think it's better off to start out with the question. I'm not sure how you do it. The best example of getting public input that I've seen, it's quite a while ago, in the early 1970s, Springfield ran a program called Project Listen, which was followed it's called the Delphi interviewing technique, where they worked at it over a year and brought people together, and it really guided Springfield solidly on things to do and build a base of support for the city that lasted for probably 5 to 8 years. You turn over I've never seen anybody else do anything like that since then, but it works well. What I know doesn't work is public hearings are, because all you get out is the people who are on one side or the other, and you only get people who have a stake in, interest in it. So you don't really get an understanding of what the community wants out of that. Makes it hard. I think elected bodies are in a difficult position now because it's very hard to get that. Traditional surveying does not work very well because it's selective now. You can't get a good random sample anymore because people don't, half of the community young people don't even take their mail anymore, so you can't get a mail survey. You can't get a telephone survey because no one answers the phone unless it's in their contact list. So it's difficult. I'm just saying. So I think your approach is right. I don't know how you do that. The other observation is, I was thinking a lot as you were describing that. I've thought of this before, but the problem with Main Street in Springfield going on over to Franklin Boulevard is it was designed as a state highway, and it was designed to connect communities that were separated. They're not separated anymore. And Franklin Boulevard in Eugene, clearly, if you look at the development, it's like driving through a tunnel now with all the high rises along there and the research facilities. Truly, that needs to be changed in some way. It's not safe, and it's going to get worse as more people live along that. So that's an issue, and it probably deserves a long discussion. Springfield is really, it's interesting. The history of Springfield is 2 towns. You had Springfield, the downtown, that until the early 1960s stopped at about 28th Street. And you had Thurston. And unless you're a newcomer today, you don't say you live in Springfield. If you live out on the other side of 57, you live in Thurston. And the highway was really a high-speed way to go between it. When I moved to Springfield in the early 60s, every 3rd or 4th vehicle on Main Street was a log truck. I mean, it functioned in a totally different way than it's trying to function today. And clearly, part of the problem is is enforcement. And part of the enforcement issue is you don't have enough police to do the enforcement. So I think there's an alternative there. And it's really hard to change people. I become greatly fond of saying the strongest force in the universe is inertia, and you kind of alluded to that.
Change is hard.
People know what they know. They don't know what's possible in the future. And that's hard to make that change.
I don't know what the solution is for Main Street. I'm not here to tell you what the solution is. That's for the community of Springfield to figure out. What I will say is that Main Street in Springfield is, to be blunt, like thousands of main streets all over the country. All sorts of communities have state highways that run through them. They're designed the same way. They're 5 lanes, undivided with center turn lane. And Springfield is not the first community to face concerns about how do we move motor vehicles and other people and do it in a safe way. There are solutions out there. I said before that only 20% of what BEST does is technical, planning, engineering. 80% of it's the sort of soft stuff we've been talking about. There are solutions for Main Street. It's a question of whether the community wants to come together to implement that. I saw actually Tiffany and my staffer, Claire and Celine, and how do I moderate her? You go, Tiffany.
Well, my question is, you talked a little bit about the West Eugene MX project that successfully was completed, and we've been now living with it for, several years now. I'm curious if BEST has ever thought about or has planned to maybe do any outreach along that corridor as to hear from the businesses who were impacted as to kind of how it's working for them. I've heard things anecdotally that would suggest that it's been working well for businesses and that they really they didn't have to close down. And in fact, there was one business in particular who will say, this is the best thing that happened to my business. But I'm just curious if BEST has ever thought about that as a strategy to try to help engage folks about what could be.
We've talked about that. We have thought about it. Absolutely. Again, BEST is a really tiny, privately funded nonprofit. We're not the government. We don't have taxpayer funding. We need to focus our energies on advancing our mission, which is trying to see positive change. In that particular exercise, we would love to hear the answer to that. I don't know that that's something that we could get funders to support. That would seem to be something the City of Eugene and LTD should partner together, and do that kind of thing. Frankly, I think, yes, I think that that's a role for government. Claire, Ringer here, my program manager.
I just want to say I love that idea, Tiffany. I've never thought of that, and I would love to gather, the success stories and say, see, here's an example of somewhere in Eugene, because when we give examples from elsewhere, people are like, that's not Eugene, that's not Springfield, that can never happen here. So I'd love to do something local. But actually, what I had to say was add on to what Lee was saying. Why it's even more challenging for local governments to hear from their constituents is because in our outreach, BEST has been hearing a growing amount of distrust in local governments despite wonderful efforts to have engaging open houses with interactive maps and free food and free, coffee and everything, which I think, even 5-10 years ago, that would have been a huge draw, but there's just this kind of new flavor of distrust and recalls despite, best efforts sometimes have absolutely no reason at all. And I think that's what makes me really excited about BEST's work, coming at it from the grassroots community level, is that we have that leg up in terms of, maybe they do know who we are, maybe they don't know who we are, but the first thing that I always say is, hello, good to meet you. We're not the government, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. We had a discussion with the River Road Community Organization, Neighborhood Association, a few weeks ago with their board of directors, and we were introducing the work that we're doing and saying, we'd like to hear from people, everybody on River Road, what suggestions you have, do you want to help us? And we framed that and said, as context, the Moving Ahead project is paused. That's what it says on the Moving Ahead website. And then they said, well, wait, if you've paused your project, why are you coming to ask us what we think? We said, well, we don't have a project. We're not LTD. We're not the City of Eugene. We're a nonprofit. The government has paused their project. And during that pause, it creates an opportunity for us to kind of come in, take a fresh look at this, and maybe have a different perspective. But people do have this strong distrust of government and assumption I refer to us, or other people refer to us as the trans-industrial complex. Over and over again, people think that we're getting lots and lots of money from local governments to make them look good. If only that were true.
I would love if we had a big secret funder out there.
Yeah. Celine, let me go to Carmel first, and then I'll get to you.
I was gonna say, that's a very good point that Claire made, with AR, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carmel Snyder with ARP. And we have worked in this area of transportation and housing and other issues that we call age-friendly issues, because we have these 8 domains that create age-friendly communities, that create communities that are a good place for people to grow up in and retire in and, you know, live their whole lives in. And so other communities have logged on to us and said, city councils have said, hey, we're not giving anybody a public hearing. Let's have a meeting with ARP and we'll show up and, you know, our city planners will give their spill. And we've seen that in other communities. So that's kind of the same way, is that sometimes you have to do a step back from having the government be the ones that are asking the questions. They can be there to provide the background, but sometimes you do have to lean on other organizations in your community, and like us, we're here to do that as well.
Celine.
Yeah, I was interested when you mentioned that there are other communities who have dealt with this Main Street issue, which I think is something we see a lot in smaller towns, right? They're built around the transit corridor that connects them to someplace else. Can you list perhaps some of these illustrated cases that have addressed this? Are there examples you would recommend?
I don't know what that noise out of the street is. I'm having trouble hearing you. I think somebody's power washing something.
Yeah.
What I will say, and see if I'm answering the question that I didn't quite hear. We have a university here. We've got a planning department. Mark Schlossberg and his students did a book called Rethinking Streets. It's actually a series now that's got 3 volumes. But the students went all over the country looking at places where they've rethought streets of all sorts of types, main streets, neighborhood streets, sort of highways, different types of things, and found examples where communities have successfully changed those as models for what works, with numbers of saying, you know, this recipe works in this case for this kind of street to do this kind of thing, and sort of flesh that out. Again, you know, only 20% of what we need to do is this technical stuff. The answers are out there. That's not the hard part of this. The hard part is bringing people together to get over fear, which is understandable, figure out what the problems are, come together saying, we're going to have a better but not perfect solution, and agree to do that to make things better. Did I get at what you're asking? Yeah. Rethinkingstreets.org or rethinkingstreets.com, and you can download all those resources for free. Other questions?
I was gonna say, you can also look on the ARP age-friendly, communities, extended community site, and it has a link to a lot of different communities that will highlight some of their work around the main streets as well.
And the city of Springfield is an age-friendly community, is partnering with ARP.
It is.
So age-friendly, if I'm not mistaken, Carmel, the idea originally comes from the World Health Organization.
Yes.
It's an international idea, but here in the United States, it's ARP that is the primary communicator around this. Age-friendly, obviously ARP is advocating for seniors, but it turns out that the needs of seniors are not that different from the needs of youth. When I had that list of people who don't have regular access to a car, it's people at the ends of the age spectrum. And what we found is if you design a community that works for people who are young and old, it typically works for all of us. If it doesn't work for people who are young and old, then it's not such a great, it could be a better community. Did I get that right?
Yes, and if you just take a moment when you're driving and you see somebody walking, look and see who's walking. It's usually kids, teenagers, or older adults.
All right. Well, thank you.
How are we doing?
Yeah, this is perfect. I just wanted to wrap this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good, great information. Always a pleasure to have you, Rob. I just want to thank everybody for being here today. And quick plug, if you're not already a member of City Club, we would love to have you as a member of City Club, and you can visit our website for information about that. We have some fun upcoming programs that we'll be sharing usually on our website, but also in our emails. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I think with that, I want to thank the Springfield Chamber for also this space. We love being able to have our in-person meetings here again. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, Rob.
We have more of these handbills. If you know people who might want to let us know how they think Main Street's doing, just take some. And they're also, this link goes to a website where you can print out your own.